Happy is the man that findeth wisdom and the man that getteth understanding, a standard to be under. Right? This book right here. And we'll start tonight. Oh, excuse me. We'll start tonight at page 4. At the first full sentence, I guess, or the first sentence outside of the paragraph. Can't really call it the paragraph, but we'll go to page 4 in case you have the book or you get it later on. And we'll see how far we can get. Probably going to do a lot of reading tonight. But want to see how tonight we're going to focus on the UCC and taxes. Because we talk a lot about taxes. You don't have to pay this, do this, etc. Right? So how do we get to a place where we can start comprehending how taxes work? Now, I'm not sure we're going to make it to common law. Those of you who have Black history, we teach that sometimes too. Black's Law Dictionary 1. We'll be talking about that some more next week after we use the first 10 minutes to talk about what a person is in better dialogue. Then we can start dealing with some common law for a person or for people and how that works. Right. So we might get to that today in this book. That's why we said all these things flow together. Spirituality, the kingdom, law, etc. It all works together. Right. All works together. And we got to be able to see those things work together. Right. So let's go to, once again, we're in the UCC Connection. The book is called The UCC Connection, How to Free Yourself from Legal Tyranny. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom and the man that getteth understanding. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 13. And a quote for you here: governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All righty. So what does that mean? Governments are the institute. And by the way, you are the what? You are the master, right? You are the teacher. So we need to make sure that we master this, right? So when it says, somebody help me out, right? If it says governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, what do we think that means? I'm going to say it slower. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Let me say it one more time, right? The governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What does that mean to you when you hear that? What does that mean to you when you hear that? Anybody? No wrong, right answers. If you don't know if it's wrong or right. Trying to see if we can get our thoughts together. Anybody want to put in the chat this time? You can put in the chat if you're on Zoom. Any guesses? No. Can you guys hear me all right?
Can you please repeat that? Hello.
Oh, hey, thank you. All right. So governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What do you think that means?
It sounds like it's power giving of yourself. I guess you could say, like they make the government and the government gives them power.
Yes, I'm on. Yeah. So the government is instituted. Yes, the government that you live, the United States Corporation, right? It was instituted, was put in place among men, right? We can agree with that. However, the next part, where does the power come from, or where is it derived from? It says that they derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, all this government, all this stuff that you're seeing, all these people talking about this, that, whatever that you have to do and be a part of, right? The only reason they can do it is because you give them consent. If you don't give them consent, they have no power. Right? What are we talking about in this UCC, Uniform Commercial Code? And we're going to focus today on taxes. Right? That'll be our focus today, taxes. All right. So once again, I'm going to start on page 4 at the place where it says section 1 at the top of the page. We're going to start on page 4. It's where it says section 1. Section 1, never argue the amount of deficiency. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, right? But you should get the gist of what we're doing, right? This is him talking about how he dealt with the IRS and how if he had gone to court, he probably would have not been able to deal with the IRS correctly. But since he didn't go to court, he was actually able to not have to deal with the IRS at all. That's the part that we've missed so far. All right, so section 1, never argue the amount of deficiency. Fortunately, I had been given just a little bit of information. Never argue the facts in a tax case. Now, what is it that you're taught to do if your taxes aren't right? Somebody help me, right? You should never argue, right, the facts in a tax case. But what's the first thing that they tell you to argue? If your taxes, or if they say you owe taxes or this and that, what's the first thing they tell you to do? They tell you to argue, right? They tell you, well, present us the facts, this and that, or whatever. You're not going to out argue the IRS when it comes to bookkeeping.
Yeah, they tell you to redo your taxes and to ensure the amount, and that if it isn't correct, they're going to do it for you again.
Right.
So it's like you've already said, I owe this.
Yeah. Not only do you say I owe this, they'll usually find a way to say you probably owe more, right? So they got you to agree to the first amount, and then they multiply it. Okay. So never argue the facts in a tax case. Maxim, arguments are for fools. If you're not required to file, what do you care whether they say you owe $60 or $60,000? If you are not required to file, the amount doesn't matter. Don't argue the amount. That is an issue of fact. Did you catch that? In other words, the way we do it in our live sessions, what do we say? There's context without facts is nothing. Facts without context is nothing, right? If there's not contextual facts, then it's not even law. It's not truth. There's nothing in it, right? It's vanity. It's empty. So what do? They say, hey, we need you to recognize that you owe, just like we talked about before when creditors call you, right? We need you to know that you owe us $6,000. And you go, $6,000? I wasn't prepared for that. $6,000. Well, I don't argue you having a whole argument you don't need to have. What do you need to say? You need to tell them, I'm not required to file. That's a whole different conversation, right? You are the master. Don't let somebody who should be your apprentice at the most become somebody who masters you when they don't even know how law works. We're going to see that in a little bit, right? So just want to put that out there again. So don't argue the amount. That is an issue of fact. In most instances, when you get a notice of deficiency, it is usually for some fantastic amount. The minute you say, I don't owe that much, you have voluntarily agreed that you owe them something. As my wife was saying earlier, right? So you're saying, hey, I don't owe that much. Okay, you're admitting that you owe them something. You have voluntarily agreed that you owe them something, and you have just given them your jurisdiction. Why? Because you said that you owe them. You understand, right? See these words coming together? So just don't be shocked at the amount of a notice of deficiency, NOD. Even if it's $10 million, if the law says that you are not required to file or pay tax, the amount doesn't matter. So stop arguing over amounts. By arguing the amount, they will just say that you must go to tax court and decide what the amount is to be. By the time you get to tax court, the law issues are all decided. You are only there to decide how much you owe because you even showed up, right? If you show up to the case, then in a sense, right, unless you can be slick with it and know how to say, hey, I'm not here, I'm representing my straw man. You try to put something and tie me to my straw man. Maybe my straw man owes it, but then if they can tie it to your straw man, you're still in trouble, right? So if you can make sure that you can make it plain that I don't owe you taxes, then we can have a conversation. I'm sorry, babe, you had your hand up?
I think like paying a parking ticket or a moving violation is an admission of guilt. Mm-hmm. So once you pay it, it's pretty much finished. You're not getting your money back, and the discussion's finished. Yeah,
because you're saying I owe you, right? A negotiable instrument. We've talked about how a negotiable instrument you can use to make sure that you can save something you can't afford to pay. Also, negotiable instrument means what? I'm trying to negotiate. If I'm trying to negotiate, then that means I'm trying to pay. If I'm trying to pay, that means I must be in debt. If I must be in debt, then I should pay the tax. Right? Everybody with us? Everybody with us? I'll make sure. All right. Okay. So by arguing I'm sorry, next paragraph. So I went to see the agent and told him that I wasn't required to file. He said, peep game, he said, you are required to file, Mr. Freeman. But I had all the SC cases and I started reading them to him. In other words, I did my research. I had something that set precedence. And I began to read them to him. So remember I said you were the master? We always start out by saying you got to tell yourself, remind yourself, I am the master. Say it to you. You don't even have to come on over the microphone. Just remember to tell yourself, I am the master, right? So this is what happened. Right? He said, I don't know anything about law. right? Or this is what the person said. He's Mr. Freeman, the person who's writing this. He said, I don't owe you anything, and I can recite law to you. This was the person's response. The person's response was, he said, I don't know anything about law. Right? Now you got him. Why do you think you got him now? He just admitted flat out. He just said, I don't know anything about law. Why do you think that's important for you? Goes with you being the master. Why is that important? It's important for you because if they don't know law, then they don't know what they're doing. If they're breaking laws, you get to tell them straight up, you're breaking law. You get to show it. And if they don't do what's correct, you get to go over their head and you get to make sure that something is given back to you, right? Remedial law. We talked about that some in Black's Law Dictionary. We'll talk about it some more in this class as well throughout these next few sessions, right? These next couple months or month and a half now, right? So his response is, look, I don't know anything about law, but this is what he says. I don't know anything about law, Mr. Freeman, but the code says that you are required to file. So what? I don't know anything about law, but I'm not going off of law. I'm going off of a code. All right, follow this now. The code says that you are required to file, and you're going to pay that amount on, or you're going to go to tax court. That's the threat. But how can you threaten me and you don't know the law? See, realize these people don't know what they're talking about. He said, so when he says that, you're going to go to tax court. I thought that someone there ought to know something about law. So I asked to talk to his superior. I went to him and I got out my SC cases and he wouldn't listen to them. He said, I don't know anything about law, Mr. Freeman. Finally, I got to the problems resolution officer and he said the same thing. He said that the only person above him was the district director. So I went to see him. By the time I got to his office, they had phoned ahead and his secretary said he was out, but I heard someone in his office and I knew he was there. I went down the elevator around the corner of the federal building and into Senator Simpson's office. There was a girl sitting at the desk and she asked me if she could help me. I told her my problem. I said that I really think the district director is up there. I asked her to call the IRS and tell them that it was Senator Simpson's office calling and to ask the district director if the district director was in. I said, if you get him on the phone, tell him that you are from the senator's office and you have a person whom you are sending over to speak to him. If he is, can he just wait 5 minutes? And it worked. See, he spoke like somebody who had authority. He spoke like somebody who was authorized. I know this law, and since I know the law, I can operate in this better. Because if I go to the senator's office, this has happened to me before, even though I didn't necessarily have to follow all the way through. But we had issues with one of the places we were at. I called the mayor's office. Guess what? I got an answer right away. And all I mentioned was, hey, they trying to mess with somebody's land unlawfully. And this is a place where you grew up in. You grew up in this area. We live right down the street from the grandparents that raised you. It would be a shame if I had to tell them that you're allowing people to take land over there. And they call back. Now, you might say that's shady, this and that. No, that's somebody who has authority. You're supposed to watch over these people. And you won't defend them. Now, I didn't get a chance, didn't really have to at the end to have to go through all the stuff, but, got to answer right away. You got to speak as somebody who has authority. So it says, I went down the elevator. I'm sorry. It worked. He was there. So I ran back up to his office. His secretary met me. And when I came in and said, Mr. Freeman, you're so lucky. The director just arrived. The director was very nice and offered me coffee and cookies. And we sat and talked. So he asked me what I wanted to talk to him about. If you've never had someone say to you, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you, watch out. Right? But we can turn that around and approach them in the same way. So I said, I thought you ought to know that there are agents working for you who are writing letters over your name that you wouldn't agree with. Do you read all the mail that goes out of this office over your signature? The director said, oh, I couldn't read everything. It goes out here by the bagful. That was what I thought. I said, there are some of your agents writing letters which contradict the decisions of the Supreme Court of the United States of America, and they're not doing it over their name. They're doing it over your name. Now, anybody who's taken apologetics or heard me speak of something, there's a 3-word phrase that starts with the letter B. I'll see if anybody can remember. As soon as I say it, y'all gonna be like, man, he says that all the time. 3-word phrase. that this begins with the letter B that I say it should never be on you. You need to put it on somebody else. Anybody remember what that is? Burden of proof. Yeah, burden of proof. Amen. Right? He did something apologetically sound. He knew how debate works, in other words. He knew, let me not have a thing to where, right, I'm going to agree with my adversary quickly. Okay, you are saying that these people work for you and you don't know the law. I'm going to agree with you, and I'm not going to go ahead and try to make you feel bad. I'm not going to try to railroad you. I'm not going to try to make it to where you have to pay all these penalties, da-da-da. I'm just going to talk to you and say, hey, man, there's some people out here doing some scandalous stuff. Would you like me to tell you how they're messing you over? They're putting a burden of proof on you, but it should be on them because they're out here lying. They're about to get you in trouble. Didn't you hear that I had to go to the senator's office to make this happen? That's what he just did, right? He used law, right? The same thing that the government is there to help you. Then he said, okay, let me go ahead and use that. Let me agree with my adversary quickly, right? So I don't have to pay and get locked up and pay to the uttermost farthing. That's what Yahshua said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26. Agree with your adversary as quickly as possible. Know how the law works and make sure that there's something you can agree with to ensure that now, since we have agreement through all over that bridge of agreement, I can take the burden of proof off of me and I can place it upon thee. Amen. That's a word right there, right? This is why this stuff is spiritual. We got to know what this is. So he said, they're doing this over your name. He was very interested to hear about it and asked if I had any examples. I just happened to have some with me, right? Same thing he's been trying to show everybody the whole time. And the SC cases, or if I didn't mention it, SC stands for Supreme Court cases, SC cases. So I got them out and presented them to him. Supreme Court cases, and he even labeled it. Remember I said sometimes you got to have your own documentation and bring it with you. So he even labeled this, and it said Supreme Court cases supporting Freeman's position. The director thought it was very interesting and asked if I could leave this information with him, which I did. He said he would look it over and contact me within 3 days. 3 days later, he called me up and said, I'm sure, Mr. Freeman, that you will be glad to know that your notice of deficiency has been withdrawn. We've determined that you're not a person required to file. See the difference between a person, persons, people? See? Right? You are not a person required to file. Your file is closed and you will hear no more from us. Not just on this case, you will hear no more from us. Did you catch that? I haven't heard another word from them since. That was in 1980. And I haven't filed since 1969. So basically, he argued on behalf of stuff going back to 1969, and then from 1980 on, they didn't even bother him again. Because once your case is filed and they say you're not a person, right? At least not the kind of person they want you to be, then they can't come to you anymore. That's your status. You see that? See? This is why we have to have knowledge of this, right? So section 2, the Supreme Court on trial. I thought sure I had the answer, but when a friend got charged with willful failure to file an income tax, he asked me to help him. I told him that they would have to prove that he willfully failed to file, and right, a result of your will, I will bless the Lord. We were talking about that tonight, right? They had to prove that he willfully failed to file, and I suggested that he should put me on the witness stand. He should ask me if I spoke at a certain time and place in Scotts Bluff, and did I see him in the audience? He should then ask me what I spoke about that day. When I got to the stand, I brought out all the SC cases, the Supreme Court cases I used with the district director. I thought I would be lucky to get a sentence or two out before the judge cut me off, but I was reading whole paragraphs and the judge didn't stop me. I read one and then another and so on. And finally, when I had read just about as much as I thought I should, the judge called a recess of court. What's a recess for? We need a break, right? This person is messing this stuff up, right? This person is basically making it where they shouldn't even be here, right? I told Bob I thought we had made it or hadn't made. There was just no way they could rule against him after all that testimony. All that testimony. So we relaxed. The prosecution presented its case, and he, my friend Bob, decided to rest his case on my testimony, which showed that he was not required to file and that the Supreme Court had upheld his position. The prosecutor then presented his closing statements, and we were just sure that we had won. But at the very end, the judge spoke to the jury and told them, you will decide the facts of this case, and I will give you the law. Wait a minute. Tricky, right? Now, what did we say earlier? Right? Section 1 that we went over. Never argue the facts in a tax case. Got you. Right? The law required this man to file an income tax. You decide whether or not he filed it. What a shock. The jury convicted him. Later, some of the members of the jury said, what could we do? The man had admitted that he had not filed the form, so we had to convict him. As soon as the trial was over, I went around to the judge's office and he was just coming in through his back door. I said, Judge, by what? Now, judges don't like this, but once again, you are the master. Don't forget that. He went around the corner and he said, Judge, by what authority do you overturn the standing decisions of the United States, of the Supreme Court of the United States of America? You sat on the bench while I read that case law. Now, how do you, a district court judge, have the authority to overturn decisions of the Supreme Court? He says, oh, those were old decisions. I said, those are standing decisions. They have never been overturned. I don't care how old they are. You have no right to overturn a standing decision of the Supreme Court of the United States of America's Supreme Court in a district court, especially. Section 3. Right. Any questions, comments, or concerns, by the way? Any questions so far? I don't want to keep just going and going and going without giving anybody a chance.
I find it intriguing.
Any questions, comments, concerns before we go on? We still got some time. I might even go a couple minutes over, just a couple, but I know we started late. So
that's non-legal, right?
Say it again.
When you said that you're not supposed to argue facts in tax case, but then that is the thing you do, right?
You're not, well, yeah, you're not supposed to, right? But the problem is that's what they're trying to get you to do, right? So basically, not even necessarily that it's not lawful, even though it's really not technically, but because the facts technically are the law, right? So if the law says that I don't have to pay taxes, I already told you I don't have to pay taxes. But the judge tried to say, well, the code said, really what they said, I'll tell you the law. And what did he do? He gave him a code. Remember when we read the first part, it said that this was a code. But now, right, that you have to file. But now he's saying, I will dictate the law to you. But what the guy does is he goes to the judge. He says, well, hold up. How are you going to do that? Right? Because it's a standing law. It supersedes whatever code you're trying to put in here. If you're dealing in code, UCC code, it has to be lawful. If you're not going to follow the code, and this is Supreme Court code, and you're in a district court, this means that you have to obey the Supreme Court decisions. This is not state versus Supreme Court as much as it is the federal government has to step in. And so I'm telling you what the federal government says by law that protects my rights. And what the judge did was say, which was clever. I hate to say it that way, but it is what it is. We keep acting like these people aren't smart, right? The judge cleverly, deceptively, but with clever deception, decided to go ahead and say, hey, all that stuff that they said was true. But guess what? I don't want y'all to even think about any of that stuff, jury. Just listen to what I say. What I say that matters is what I declare to be law. That's where he messed up. That's where the judge messes up. So that was the unlawful part, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I don't know. I feel like I bounced around.
The thing to correct that, or to, I guess, fight against an injustice.
So the next step would be basically you can go above the judge. The judge is not the end all be all, right? So you can go above the judge, even to whom they have to report to. If they don't get that done, pretty much at the district court, you ain't that far from the Supreme Court, if that's what you want to do, right? But if the judge sees that happening, you also have to recognize by law, right? Judges can not only be subpoenaed themselves, not only would that judge, could you tell them that you want that judge or somebody recognize, somebody who represents that judge's office or courts or whatever to be there as well. You could also get to a place where you say, look, that judge has messed up and we're dealing with commerce now, right? You're dealing with my commercial, Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. You're dealing with money. You wasted your money. You wasted my money. You've taken away my money. You wasted my friend's money. There needs to be some kind of remedy, right? We need to, I'm going to give you procedural law. I'm going to show you judges, the actual judges of the Supreme Court. I'm going to show you that I showed them all the stuff that you said was all right and that it was standing law. And they didn't do what they were supposed to. Normally, before it gets to that point, the judge is going to stop because you can put a lien on the judge's property if you can make sure that you show that you literally just showed them law You gave them the exact law, and they didn't listen to it. That's the trick. It's trying to make sure that it's like, especially when people ask me for help on court cases, one of the trickiest things is I don't know what happened. I don't know if somebody's exactly telling the truth, or even if they're telling the truth, it's getting enough evidence to show that, can I find something written? Right? Get enough evidence. Can I find something that's written? Can I find something that's code? Can I find something that's lawful? Can I find how the judge was told this, but then they switched to something else? Right? And then, the judge a lot of times will try to overturn it. Now, if the judge made it, it's been years, that same judge may or may not be able to overturn it. You got to know who to go to. So it depends on what the situation is. But if you know what to say, or if you know what to do, a lot of judges are going to back down automatically, because judges recognize that you're dealing with their livelihood, you're dealing with their pensions, you're dealing with their ability to be a judge. You might even if they are found to be messing with the facts and to lie, they can take they can be dismembered from the bar, right? So they can't even practice law anymore, let alone be a judge. So there's different ways you could do it. Depending on what the situation is, we'd have to get into it. Right. Great question though. But I'm gonna try and push ahead just a little bit. So let's see. Section 3, public law versus public policy. Public law versus public policy. This is big, right? This is big. He said, name any decision of the Supreme Court after 1938 and I'll honor it. But all the decisions you read were prior to 1938. He went on, prior to 1938, the Supreme Court was dealing with public law. Since 1938, the Supreme Court was dealing with public law. Since 1938, the Supreme Court has dealt with public policy. The charge that Mr. S was being tried for is a public policy statute and not public law. Kind of, sort of, but once again, some of them know the law, right? Some of them actually know it, so you got to be prepared for this stuff. So, and those Supreme Court cases do not apply to public policy. I asked him what happened in 1938. He said that he had already told me too much. He wasn't going to tell me anymore. Section 4, 1938 in the Erie Railroad. So if you're looking up this case, this is the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins. Erie, E-R-I-E, like Lake Erie, E-R-I-E Railroad versus Tompkins, Tompkins. Okay. Well, I began to investigate. I found that 1938 was the year of the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case of the Supreme Court. It was also the year the courts claimed they blended law with equity. Law of equity opens up now, right? I read the Erie Railroad case. A man had sued the Erie Railroad for damages when he was struck by a board sticking out of a boxcar as he walked along beside the tracks. The district court had decided on commercial law, negotiable instruments law, right? Commercial law. What are negotiable instruments, by the way? We're talking about commercial. I'm sorry, somebody said what's negotiable? What's a negotiable instrument? Something we use all the time. Pay a tender, money, cash, right? These negotiable instruments, right? Bonds at times, right? We had to go a little deeper for bonds, but let's just stick with money. So the district court had decided on commercial law, negotiable instruments law, that this man was not under any contract with the Erie Railroad, and therefore he lacked understanding to sue the company. Under common law or natural law, he was damaged and he would have the right to sue. This overturned a standing decision of over 100 years, which before that you're dealing with 1840, Swift versus Tyson. Swift, S-W-I-F-T, Swift, like somebody's fast, Swift versus Tyson, right? Like the meat, like the chicken y'all be buying, T-Y-S-O-N, okay? Swift versus Tyson in 1840 was a similar case, and the decision of the Supreme Court then was that in case of this type, the court would judge by the common law or natural law of the state where the incident occurred. In this case, Pennsylvania. In the Erie Railroad case, the Supreme Court now ruled that all federal cases will be judged under the negotiable instruments law. There would be no more decisions based on the common law at the federal level. So if I'm going to a federal level case, right? If I'm going to a federal court or federal district, I can't come in there talking about common law. Right? But I can come in there if I know negotiable instruments law, right? Let's even look it up just to make sure that we got this. What is negotiable instruments law? right? The UCC, that's what we're talking about today. The UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, defines a negotiable instrument as an unconditioned writing that promises or orders the payment of a fixed amount of money. So we could even say, in a certain sense, checks, stuff like that as well, right? Drafts and notes, even your birth certificate, by the way, right? Because money's attached to your birth certificate. Drafts and notes are the two categories of instruments. A draft is an instrument that orders a payment to be made. An example is a check, right? Or cash, money, bonds, etc. Right? So now let's go to UCC 3-104. That's UCC 3-104. And let's look up at what a negotiable instrument is. Is payable to bearer or to order at the time it is issued or first comes into possession of a holder. It is payable on demand of demand or at a definite time, and does not state any other undertaking or instruction by the person promising or ordering payment to do any act in addition to the payment of money. But the promise or order may contain an undertaking. We might be going too deep for the rest of this, but let's just finish this up. An undertaking or power to give, maintain, or protect collateral or secure payment. An authorization or power to the holder to confess judgment or realize on or dispose of collateral, or a waiver of the benefit of any law intended for the advantage of protection of an obligor or an obligor, excuse me. Right? So we can talk about cashier's checks, check, teller's check, traveler's check, certificate of deposit. All these things can be a example of a negotiable instrument. So now we have this thing that pops up here where we had a problem. Somebody got hit, right? They got hit by a part of the train that's sticking out too far, right? They sued, right? And he used natural law, right? He said that, when it comes to nature, and when we're talking about nature, right? Those of you who take Black's Law Dictionary 1, right? Remember we were talking about persons and we talked about natural persons and we started getting into nature and all these different terms and persons and all this stuff. We were talking about something that popped up to where natural law, right? Or I'm sorry, hold on one second. Yeah, so the blending of law, dealing with natural law, this person got hit, right? And he said that he's talking about natural law. Now, what is natural? The Supreme Court said that we got to pay him due to natural law, right? Now, why do they have to pay him due to natural law? Because nature is not just considered to be natural to the United States of America, natural to a white man, black man, white woman, black woman, whatever. Natural, right? What is natural is considered to be anything that is of the Most High, right? So when he sued and the Supreme Court said we got to pay him, he's got to win. The reason they said that is because, hey, natural law popped up, right? It's not natural for you guys to have something, right, moving that fast with something sticking off of it. You got to pay them, right? But companies didn't like that. So what did they do? They were able to get it fixed to where they got back again, and they said, okay, this time what's going to be this? What's the standing decision now? They went over. They didn't go to nature, right, or even procedural law. They went to policy. They went to the policy of what? Negotiable instruments law, right? This was a puzzle. Now let me just keep reading what he says. This was a puzzle to me. As I put these new pieces together, I reasoned that all our courts since 1938 were merchant law courts and not common law courts. And a lot of people say that still to this day. There were still pieces missing from the puzzle. Section 5, a friend in court. Fortunately, I made a friend of a judge. Now, you won't make friends with a judge if you go into court like a wolf in black sheep clothing or black sheep country, right? And you must approach him as though you are the sheep and he is the wolf. If you go into court as a wolf, if you make demands and tell the judge what the law is, right, how he had better uphold the law, or else, remember the verse, I send you forth as a sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and gentle or as harmless as doves. Doves, right? So we're talking about be wise, be gentle. It doesn't mean don't be lawful. Doesn't mean act like you, doesn't mean be a doormat, right? Anybody ever seen the show Columbo? I used to love, I love the show because my mom used to love the show. I can't even remember an episode now, for real. But my mom watched Columbo all the time. So I had this, I really like, one thing I liked about Columbo is he always asked questions, and his goal was to always ask questions from a position of acting like he was stupid, right? He would always be like dirty and dingy, at least that's what he would look like. He would have his shoulders hunched over. He would always like listen and listen. He would be like, man, I'm so dumbfounded. Then at the end, he would just start asking questions. And because the person started getting so lax, because they were like, oh yeah, man, this person's dumb. This is what the police are doing. They don't even comprehend the law. That he would catch him, right? Simply because he let them think that they were the best things to slice bread. And he was always able to catch him, right? So that's more so what it's talking about. Right. So remember the verse, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. We have to go into court and be wise and harmless and not make demands. We must be humble and play a little dumb and ask a lot of questions. Well, I asked a lot of questions and boxed the judges into a corner where they had to give me a victory or admit that what they didn't want to admit. And this is something, by the way, that a lot of gurus teach. If you ask the right questions, your goal is to get the judge in a corner, right? Because the judge, either like he just said, the judge has to A, tell you how the system actually works, or B, they just got to go ahead and say, you won. Because there's some things, according to their law, that they actually should be allowed to be able to violate your human rights because it's not a real government. But if they find you guilty of it when you box them into a corner, then by doing that, they have to admit that, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and violate the laws that we wrote out. So a lot of gurus teach you, hey, once again, the burden of proof, get it off yourself, put it on them, ask questions about what's on them. Say, hey, I read this, USC this, UCC this. I just did some more research. I found this out. I did this, I did that. And you put them in a position to where at some point, either they have to still say, well, we're just going to go ahead and lie. And then you can go ahead and you can get that judge in trouble, or I'm not lying, but we're going to tell you the truth rather than tell you that we're living off of lies. Or they're just going to say, this is getting too much, right? We shouldn't have taken this person like this anyways. Let's just let them go. And that way we don't have to deal with bad press, or we don't have to deal with, I'm getting, a lien put on my home and all this stuff. Let me just go ahead and let this person go, right? So be honorable to law, right? Don't honor facts, especially if the fact of the matter is you don't owe the tax, right? Okay. Let's keep on going. I won the next case, and on my way out, I had to stop by the clerk's office to get some papers. One of the judges stopped and said, "You're an interesting man, Mr. Freeman. If you're ever in town, stop by, and if I'm not sitting on a case, we will visit." We'll read this last one, and then we'll be finished for tonight, right? This last section is pretty short, actually. Yeah, let's just... Okay, we'll read section 6, and then we might start at section 7. We got to go back to straw man a little bit next week, but maybe we can get to section 7 some next week. Let's read section 6. The last thing for today. This is page 9, section 6. America is bankrupt. Later, when I went to visit the judge, I told him of my problem with the Supreme Court cases dealing with public policy rather than public law. He said in 1938, all the higher judges, the top attorneys, and the U.S. attorneys were called into a secret meeting, and this is what we were told. America is a bankrupt nation. It is owned completely by its creditors. The creditors own Congress. They own the executive. They own the judiciary, and they own all the state governments. Take silent judicial notice of this fact, but never reveal it openly. Your court is operating under admiralty jurisdiction. Call it anything you want, but do not call it admiralty. Right? And section 7, matter of fact, I told you we can go a couple minutes over. We'll read section 7, we'll finish. We won't answer any questions after this because I know I'm getting a little over. If you have questions, comments, and concerns, feel free to just text me, right? Section 7, admiralty courts. The reason they cannot call it admiralty jurisdiction is that your defense would be quite different in admiralty jurisdiction from your defense under the common law. In admiralty, no court has jurisdiction unless there is a valid international contract in dispute. Study this for yourself. We're not going to go into today, right? Study valid international contract, right? In admiralty, no court has jurisdiction unless there is a valid international contract dispute. When you know it is admiralty jurisdiction and they have admitted on the record that you are in an admiralty court, you can demand that the international maritime contract to which you are supposedly party and which you supposedly have breached be placed into evidence. No court has admiralty or what we know as maritime jurisdiction unless there is a valid international maritime contract that has been breached. So you say just innocently, like a lamb, well, I never knew that I got involved with an international maritime contract. So I deny that any such a contract exists. If this court is taking jurisdiction in admiralty, then place the contract into evidence so that I might challenge the validity of the contract. What they would have to do is place the national debt into evidence. Remember I said, if you push them enough, they're going to have to start admitting some things. They would have to admit, they would have to, or what they would have to do is place the national debt into evidence. They would have to admit that the international bankers own the whole nation and that we are the bankers' slaves. And we'll leave it there. So that's page 10. We're going to go into section 8. Hopefully next time we're going to have to go a little bit back into the straw man. But thank you all for being on so much. I appreciate you. I got to go ahead and take my leave and try and get ready for tomorrow and do a couple things real quick. But thank y'all for being on. I appreciate the king, queen, each and every one of you. And y'all remember, as always, y'all stuff that you are loved, you are necessary, you are majestic, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and you, which is all of us working together, will be the reason why people who are in the system no longer have to be of it. Shalom, family. Peace.